The parking lot of the fancy car store was shining under the bright sun. Expensive cars were parked in perfect rows, looking like treasures waiting to be picked. The large glass windows of the store reflected the clear blue sky, making the place look even grander. A black SUV quietly pulled into a parking spot near the entrance. The door opened slowly and a woman stepped out. She wore a blue hoodie, a black cap, and dark sunglasses. She moved in a calm, unhurried way as if she had all the time in the world. She carefully closed the car door, adjusted her sunglasses, and then walked toward the showroom. Inside the store, the smell of new leather filled the air. The bright lights made the shiny cars sparkle, showing off their beauty. The workers in their neat, fancy suits walked around, talking to customers who looked rich and important. They gave them special attention, making sure they felt like VIPs. Sandra Bullock walked inside, but no one noticed her. She looked at the cars with real interest, her eyes moving from one vehicle to another. But none of the workers came over to help her. In this store, appearances seemed to matter a lot. The men wore expensive watches, and the women dressed in fancy designer outfits. The salespeople only spoke to those who looked like they had a lot of money. Near the service desk, a saleswoman in high heels was scanning the room. She was looking for customers who seemed like they would spend a lot of money. Her eyes briefly landed on Sandra in her simple hoodie and cap. With a small, practiced smile, she quickly looked away, deciding Sandra wasn't worth her time. Instead, she walked toward a couple who wore expensive clothes and flashy accessories. She greeted them warmly, giving them her full attention. Sandra, meanwhile, kept walking around, taking in the details of the luxurious cars. She touched the soft seats, ran her fingers over the smooth surfaces, and admired the fine details. Then one particular car caught her eye, a sleek, white convertible. It was perfect. The leather seats looked soft and comfortable, the outside shone like a mirror, and the dashboard looked high-tech and impressive. Sandra stepped closer and gently touched the car's handle. She stood there for a moment, admiring the beauty of the car. But still, no salesperson came over to assist her. After waiting a little longer, Sandra decided to take matters into her own hands. She walked over to the service desk, just as the saleswoman from earlier finished her conversation with the wealthy couple. When the saleswoman saw Sandra approaching, her polite smile stayed, but something in her eyes changed. There was a small flicker of hesitation, almost as if she had already decided Sandra wasn't an important customer. "Hi, can I help you?" the saleswoman asked in a neutral tone, adjusting her name tag. Sandra gestured toward the convertible. "I like that car. Is it available?" The saleswoman glanced at the car for a brief moment before looking back at Sandra. A small, barely noticeable smile appeared, but her eyes showed doubt. "Oh, that's one of our most exclusive models," she said. "It comes with a premium package. Maybe I can show you some more affordable options that might suit what you're looking for." Sandra's expression didn't change. "I'm really interested in this one," she said calmly. "I'd like to know more about it." The saleswoman hesitated for a moment, as if deciding whether Sandra was worth her time. Then she let out a small sigh and said, "All right, I can tell you about it. But just so you know, this car is quite expensive." Sandra gave a small, knowing smile. "That's fine. I still want to learn more about it." The saleswoman swallowed slightly, then led Sandra to the car. As they walked, she started explaining the car's features. Sandra listened carefully, nodding as she took in the details. She asked about the engine, the seating material, and customization options. With each question Sandra asked, the saleswoman's surprise grew. "You seem to know a lot about cars," she finally said, trying to hide her astonishment. Sandra shrugged. "I like to know what I'm buying." The saleswoman forced a smile. "Well, this model offers exceptional drivability. But of course, it's designed for a very specific clientele." Sandra ignored the hidden message in her words and ran her fingers over the leather steering wheel. "Sounds great. Is it available for a test drive?" The saleswoman let out a small, amused laugh, as if Sandra had just said something silly. "A test drive?" "Yes," Sandra said. "I'd like to see how it handles on the road before making a decision." The saleswoman hesitated. "Normally, we only allow test drives for serious buyers." Sandra raised an eyebrow. "And I don't seem serious?" The saleswoman quickly shook her head. "Oh, that's not what I meant. It's just, this model is in high demand. We have to be a bit more selective with test drives." Sandra said nothing. She simply watched the saleswoman, noticing the slight discomfort in her eyes. Finally, she gave a small smile. "That's fine. Just put me on the list of interested buyers." The saleswoman looked relieved. But before she could respond, a new voice spoke. "Excuse me, Do you have this model available for a test drive? Sandra turned around and saw a man. He was dressed in fancy clothes, with neatly styled hair and a shiny watch on his wrist. The saleswoman's expression changed instantly. Her smile became bigger, and her voice was suddenly much more cheerful. Of course, sir, she said. I can arrange that for you right away. Sandra stood there saying nothing. She simply watched as the saleswoman eagerly set up the test drive for the man. She didn't even bother finishing her conversation with Sandra. Sandra slid her hands into the pockets of her hoodie. She tilted her head slightly, as if she had just confirmed something she already suspected. Under her breath, she murmured, I guess that makes things pretty clear, doesn't it? Then she turned and started walking away. No one noticed her leaving. But before stepping out, she glanced back at the convertible. Her interest hadn't faded. If anything, she wanted it even more now. The saleswoman had no idea who she had just turned away. Sandra stayed near the luxury car, looking at it thoughtfully. A few minutes later, the saleswoman returned. This time, she didn't even try to hide her attitude. So, are you still interested in this model? She asked, her voice filled with doubt. Sandra looked at her steadily. Yes, I'd like to take it for a test drive. The saleswoman lifted an eyebrow, as if Sandra had just said something crazy. A test drive? Yes, Sandra repeated. I want to see how it drives before making a decision. The saleswoman crossed her arms and leaned forward slightly. Her fake smile was completely gone now. Look, I don't know if I made this clear, but this car isn't for just anyone. We don't let just anyone test drive it. Sandra didn't look away. Just anyone? She repeated slowly. The saleswoman tilted her head slightly, as if Sandra should already understand what she meant. Yes, this car is one of our most expensive models. People who test drive it are usually pre-approved customers or have a long history with our brand. Sandra was silent for a moment, taking in every word. So only pre-approved customers can test it? She asked. Exactly. Sandra took a slow step forward, keeping her eyes on the saleswoman. But that guy over there. She nodded toward the well-dressed man talking to another salesperson. He doesn't look like a long-time customer. The saleswoman didn't even glance at him. Oh, he fits the profile, she said. We can tell he's a real buyer. Sandra let out a small laugh, but the lady selling the cars didn't smile back. She kept looking at Sandra with a serious face. Look, don't take this the wrong way, the sales lady said. But we get a lot of people who just want to drive these fancy cars for fun, take pictures and show off online. You know what I mean. She looked at Sandra like she was warning her. Sandra noticed that other workers and customers were now watching, but the sales lady didn't care. She kept talking. Honestly, I think you should pick another car, the woman continued with a fake sweet voice. We have lots of cars that might fit your life better. Sandra stayed calm. And what kind of life is that? She asked. The sales lady's eyes moved to Sandra's hoodie and cap. Something more affordable, she said. But this time she wasn't just giving a suggestion. She was telling Sandra to leave. Sandra didn't back down. She crossed her arms and tilted her head. So, you're saying you won't let me drive the car? The sales lady smirked, happy to give her answer. That's exactly what I'm saying. Sandra could feel everyone watching. Some workers looked at each other like they knew the sales lady was making a big mistake, but the woman didn't care. She took a step back, crossed her arms, and then said, Now, if you'll excuse me, I have real customers to help. Then just like that, she turned around and walked toward a couple dressed in expensive clothes. Her face suddenly changed. She was smiling and happy while talking to them. It was clear that she treated some people differently. Sandra stood there for a moment, not looking upset, just thinking. Then she walked over to the front desk, where another worker stood, looking nervous. Is something wrong, ma'am? He asked carefully. Sandra smiled. I just have a question. What do you need to show to get a test drive here? The man looked uncomfortable. Well, we usually ask for some proof that the person is serious about buying. Proof like what? Sandra asked. A document, a history of past car purchases, or maybe a down payment, he said hesitantly. Sandra nodded like she was thinking. Then she looked at the couple the sales lady was helping. Did she ask them for that? The man went silent. He knew Sandra was right. Before he could say anything, the sales lady came storming back. Ma'am, I already told you our policy. Let's not waste time. Sandra looked at her without any emotion. The sales lady crossed her arms and added with a smug smile, But if you really want a car, maybe you should go somewhere else. There's a dealership downtown that sells cars more in your price range. I think you'd like it. She smiled like she was doing Sandra a favor. Sandra just smiled back. Thanks for the suggestion. Then, without another word, she turned and walked calmly toward the exit. But before she left, she stopped and looked once more at the luxury car she had wanted to test drive. She was still interested, but now she had another idea. The saleslady was still smiling, thinking she had won. She turned back to the rich couple, happy and relaxed. The dealership kept moving as usual. People browsed the cars, workers helped customers, and everything seemed normal. But then the doors of the dealership slid open again. Something changed in the air. The room got quieter. A tall man walked in. He wore a black leather jacket and sunglasses. His dark hair was a little messy, but he walked with confidence. He didn't have to say anything. Everyone noticed him. The saleslady glanced at him while talking to the couple. She wasn't really paying attention, but then the man stopped in the middle of the showroom. He looked around, then smiled when he saw Sandra. "Hope I didn't keep you waiting too long, Bullock," he said. It was like a bomb exploded inside the saleslady's head. Bullock. The name echoed in her mind. Her face turned pale and she suddenly felt dizzy. She had just refused to serve Sandra Bullock. Time seemed to slow down. Everyone in the showroom froze. People whispered to each other. The saleslady felt her heart pound as she realized she had made a terrible mistake. Sandra was not surprised at all. She smirked, watching the truth sink into the saleslady's mind. The man, still smiling warmly, walked up to Sandra. "Good to see you, Bullock. Did you pick out your car?" The saleslady felt sick. She wanted to speak, but her throat was dry. She didn't know if she should try to explain, pretend nothing happened, or just run away in shame. The man looked around, confused. "Why does everyone look so tense?" he asked. Sandra smirked and finally turned to the saleslady, who now looked like she might faint. "I think someone just realized they made the worst mistake of their life." The saleslady gulped but still couldn't speak. The man, noticing her for the first time, frowned. "Do you work here?" The woman forced a nervous smile. "Why, yes, Mr. Reeves. Welcome. It's such an honor to have you here." Her voice had completely changed. She was suddenly polite, respectful, and eager to please. The shift was so obvious that even the other workers cringed in embarrassment for her. Sandra wasn't going to let her off so easily. "Funny," she said. "Now I have the right profile to be served, huh?" The saleslady held her breath. She was trapped. By now, everyone in the store had figured out what was happening. Workers stepped away quietly, leaving her alone to deal with it. The man looked at Sandra, then back at the saleslady. "What's going on here?" he asked. The saleslady started sweating. "Oh, nothing. Just a little misunderstanding, Mr. Reeves." "Haha." Sandra laughed dryly. "A misunderstanding?" She took a step closer. "Then explain why, just a few minutes ago, I wasn't even allowed to touch this car. But now, all of a sudden, you're so polite." The saleslady stammered. "I didn't. It wasn't like that." The man put the pieces together. "Wait, you refused to serve Sandra?" The saleslady panicked. "No. Yes. I just didn't know she was." Sandra finished the sentence for her. "Rich?" The saleslady closed her eyes, feeling the sting of those words. The man sighed, shaking his head. "This still happen?" Sandra smirked. Then she asked the question the saleslady feared the most. "So tell me, can I take the test drive now?" The saleslady nearly choked. Of course. We can arrange that right now." Sandra raised an eyebrow. "Now I can." The saleslady nodded quickly, desperate to fix her mistake. Sandra pretended to think. "No thanks. I'm not interested anymore." The saleslady looked horrified. "What?" Sandra smiled even wider. "I prefer to buy from people who treat me well from the start." The saleslady's face twisted in panic. She opened her mouth trying to fix things, but it was too late. There was nothing left to say. Sandra turned back to the man who was grinning. "Let's go, Keanu. I know a better place to buy a car." With that, she walked out of the dealership, leaving the saleslady standing there, frozen in regret, while everyone in the room watched in silence. Sandra looked at Keanu and shrugged. "Should we go?" Keanu chuckled softly and shook his head. "Absolutely." The saleswoman stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Sandra and Keanu walked toward the exit, their footsteps echoing in the silent dealership. But just before walking through the doors, Sandra stopped. She turned one last time to the saleswoman, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Oh, and thanks for suggesting that cheaper dealership," she said, her voice smooth but sharp. "But I think I'll just buy directly from the manufacturer instead." The saleswoman's face paled. She felt her heart sink as the words hit her like a ton of bricks. The weight of her mistake crushed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She could see customers whispering, employees avoiding her gaze, and the manager standing stiffly in the corner, his expression unreadable. The reality of what she had done was sinking in fast, and it was terrifying. Without another word, Sandra and Keanu walked out, the doors sliding shut behind them. The dealership remained silent, filled with tension so thick it was almost suffocating. Now that the truth was out and everyone knew who Sandra was, how would Keanu react to how she had been treated? Inside the dealership, the atmosphere remained heavy with disbelief. Customers murmured amongst themselves. Employees shifted uncomfortably, sneaking glances at the saleswoman. She still hadn't moved. Her body was stiff, her mind racing. She had humiliated one of the most beloved actresses in the world. And Keanu Reeves had witnessed it all. Keanu, who had nearly stepped outside, suddenly stopped. Instead of leaving, he turned around. His movements were slow, deliberate. His expression was unreadable, but his intense gaze locked onto the saleswoman. The weight of it made her stomach churn. The room fell into complete silence. Sandra, sensing what was about to happen, paused beside him. She watched, intrigued, as Keanu slipped his hands into his jacket pockets. With a voice calm but carrying an unbearable weight, he asked, "So, is someone going to tell me what the hell just happened here?" Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The air was thick with tension. The saleswoman opened her mouth, but no words came out. She felt like the ground beneath her was crumbling. She had been caught, exposed. Her hands began to shake. Panic set in. Her job, her reputation, everything was on the line. She had to do something. Anything. She took a deep breath and forced a smile. "Mr. Reeves, Miss Bullock, please," she said, her voice trembling. "Let me fix this. I can offer you a special discount." Sandra raised an eyebrow. "A discount?" The saleswoman nodded frantically. "Yes, as an apology. A VIP discount." Sandra turned to Keanu, her lips curving into an amused smile. "What do you think, Keanu? Should we accept the VIP discount?" Keanu crossed his arms, pretending to think. "I'm debating. Do we take the discount? Or do we go to another dealership and make sure the whole world hears about what happened here?" The saleswoman's face turned as white as a sheet. Keanu then turned to the manager, who had been watching the whole time, his face pale. "My advice? Teach your employees not to judge people by their appearance." The manager nodded quickly, sweat forming on his brow. "Absolutely, sir. It won't happen again." Keanu smirked slightly. "Good luck with the online reviews." And with that, he and Sandra turned and walked out, not sparing another glance at the dealership. The saleswoman stood there, crushed. She felt like the walls were closing in on her. Around her, people continued whispering. Customers looked at her with disgust. Employees gave her pitying glances. The humiliation was unbearable. Then the dealership manager's voice cut through the silence. "My office. Now." Her stomach twisted into knots, but she obeyed without a word. Inside the manager's office, the tension was suffocating. The door slammed shut behind her, making her flinch. The manager's face was a storm of rage and frustration. "Do you have any idea how badly you just screwed up?" he demanded, his voice sharp and unforgiving. She kept her head down, her heart pounding. The manager slammed his palm against his desk. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." She flinched again and forced herself to meet his eyes. They were filled with disappointment and anger. "We just lost two of the most influential customers in the world," he continued, his voice shaking with fury. "All because you judged someone by how they looked." He ran a hand over his face, struggling to keep his composure. "Do you even understand what this means?" The saleswoman remained silent. Her anxiety was skyrocketing. The manager picked up a tablet and threw it onto the desk. On the screen, multiple headlines had already surfaced. Sandra Bullock humiliated at luxury dealership. Keanu Reeves exposes discriminatory treatment. Saleswoman denies Sandra Bullock a test drive. Dealership faces online boycott. Keanu Reeves destroys arrogant saleswoman in luxury car showroom. Each headline felt like a punch to the gut. The scandal was everywhere. The dealership's reputation was in shambles. "The dealership is getting destroyed online," the manager said, his voice low and dangerous. "And guess who's taking the fall for this?" The saleswoman's breath caught. She felt sick. Please, sir," she stammered. "Let me fix this." The manager laughed coldly. "Fix it? You think you can just say sorry and everything will be fine?" She had no response. She knew he was right. He stared at her for a long moment, then sighed heavily. "I should fire you right now." Her heart stopped. But then, to her shock, he didn't say the final words. Maybe there's still a chance, he said instead. She blinked, confused. A chance? He nodded. I want you to prove that you've changed. Not to save your job, but because you need to learn a lesson. She swallowed hard. And if I do? Then maybe I won't fire you. A week had passed since the incident, and the dealership was still struggling. Negative reviews flooded in. Customers were unsure if they wanted to shop there anymore. The scandal had lasted for days. And the saleswoman? She was still employed, barely. The manager had given her one last shot. Prove you've changed or you're out. No second chances. And today she was about to prove herself. She worked hard. She treated customers fairly. She went out of her way to be helpful, to make sure no one ever felt the way she had made Sandra feel. At the end of the day, the manager watched from a distance, arms crossed. He had seen it all. When the last customer left, he walked up to her. There was a long pause. Then he smirked. Not bad. She let out a breathless chuckle. Thanks. He nodded. Looks like you actually learned something. She smiled. Yeah, I think I did. That night, she checked her phone. A new review had popped up. The username? Sandra Bullock. Her breath caught as she read the comment. Sometimes the best lessons come from the worst mistakes. I hope they stick. The saleswoman smiled to herself. She didn't know if Sandra had truly forgiven her. But she knew one thing. She had been given a second chance. And this time she wasn't going to waste it. If you enjoyed this story, share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories filled with adventure, mystery, and excitement. Your support means the world, and it helps keep these stories coming. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.